Verses 45 to 48. We have here an account of the consequences of this glorious miracle, which were as usual, to some it was a savor of life unto life, to others of death unto death. Some were invited by it, and induced to believe. Many of the Jews, when they saw the things that Jesus did, believed on him, and well they might, for it was an incontestable proof of his divine mission. They had often heard of his miracles, and yet evaded the conviction of them, by calling in question the matter of fact, but now that they had themselves seen this done their unbelief was conquered, and they yielded at last. But blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. The more we see of Christ, the more cause we shall see to love him and confide in him. These were some of those Jews that came to Mary, to comfort her. When we are doing good offices to others, we put ourselves in the way of receiving favors from God, and have opportunities of getting good when we are doing good. Others were irritated by it, and hardened in their unbelief. The informers were so, v. 46. Some of them, who were eyewitnesses of the miracle, were so far from being convinced that they went to the Pharisees, whom they knew to be his implacable enemies, and told them what things Jesus had done, not merely as a matter of news worthy their notice, much less as an inducement to them to think more favorably of Christ, but with a spiteful design to excite those who needed no spur the more vigorously to prosecute him. Here is a strange instance of a most obstinate infidelity, refusing to yield to the most powerful means of conviction, and it is hard to imagine how they could evade the force of this evidence, but that the god of this world had blinded their minds. Of a most inveterate enmity. If they would not be satisfied that he was to be believed in as the Christ, yet one would think they should have been mollified, and persuaded not to persecute him, but, if the water be not sufficient to quench the fire, it will inflame it. They told what Jesus had done, and told no more than what was true, but their malice gave a tincture of diabolism to their information equal to that of lying. Perverting what is true is as bad as forging what is false. Doeg is called a false, lying, and deceitful tongue, PS 52:2-4, 120:2, 3, though what he said was true. The judges, the leaders, the blind leaders, of the people were no less exasperated by the report made to them, and here we are told what they did. A special council is called and held, v. 47. Then gathered the chief priests and Pharisees a council, as was foretold, PS 2:2, the rulers take counsel together against the Lord. Consultations of the Sanhedrin were intended for the public good, but here, under color of this, the greatest injury and mischief are done to the people. The things that belong to the nation's peace were hid from the eyes of those that were entrusted with its counsels. This council was called, not only for joint advice, but for mutual irritation, that as iron sharpens iron, and as coals are to burning coals and wood to fire, so they might exasperate and inflame one another with enmity and rage against Christ and his doctrine. The case is proposed, and shown to be weighty and of great consequence. The matter to be debated was what course they should take with this Jesus, to stop the growth of his interest. They said, "What do we? For this man doeth many miracles." The information given about the raising of Lazarus was produced, and the men, brethren, and fathers were called in to help as solicitously as if a formidable enemy had been with an army in the heart of their country. First, they own the truth of Christ's miracles, and that he had wrought many of them. They are therefore witnesses against themselves, for they acknowledge his credentials and yet deny his commission. Secondly, they consider what is to be done, and chide themselves that they have not done something sooner effectually to crush him. They do not take it at all into their consideration whether they shall not receive him and own him as the Messiah, though they profess to expect him, and Jesus gave pregnant proofs of his being so, but they take it for granted that he is an enemy, and as such is to be run down. What do we? Have we no care to support our church? Is it nothing to us that a doctrine so destructive to our interest spreads thus? Shall we tamely yield up the ground we have got in the affections of the people? Shall we see our authority brought into contempt, and the craft by which we get our living ruined, and not bestir ourselves? What have we been doing all this while? And what are we now thinking of? Shall we be always talking, and bring nothing to pass? That which made this matter weighty was the peril they apprehended their church and nation to be in from the Romans. v. 48. If we do not silence him, and take him off, all men will believe on him, and, this being the setting up of a new king, the Romans will take umbrage at it, and will come with an army, and take away our place and nation, and therefore it is no time to trifle. See what an opinion they have. First, of their own power. They speak as if they thought Christ's progress and success in his work depended upon their connivance, as if he could not go on to work miracles, and make disciples, unless they let him alone, as if it were in their power to conquer him who had conquered death, or as if they could fight against God, and prosper. But he that sits in heaven laughs at the fond conceit which impotent malice has of its own omnipotence. Secondly, of their own policy. They fancy themselves to be men of mighty insight and foresight, and great sagacity in their moral prognostications. They take on them to prophesy that, in a little time, if he have liberty to go on, all men will believe on him, hereby owning, when it was to serve their purpose, that his doctrine and miracles had a very convincing power in them, such as could not be resisted, but that all men would become his proselytes and votaries. Thus do they now make his interest formidable, though, to serve another turn, these same men strove to make it contemptible. Ch. 748, have any of the rulers believed on him? This was the thing they were afraid of, that men would believe on him, and then all their measures were broken. Note, the success of the gospel is the dread of its adversaries. If souls be saved, they are undone. They foretell that if the generality of the nation be drawn after him, the rage of the Romans will be drawn upon them. They will come and take away our place, the country in general, especially Jerusalem, or the temple, the holy place, and their place, their darling, their idol, or, their preferments in the temple, their places of power and trust. Now it was true that the Romans had a very jealous eye upon them, and knew they wanted nothing but power and opportunity to shake off their yoke. It was likewise true that if the Romans should pour an army in upon them it would be very hard for them to make any head against it, yet here appeared a cowardice which one would not have found in the priests of the Lord if they had not by their wickedness forfeited their interest in God and all good men. Had they kept their integrity, they needed not to have feared the Romans, but they speak like a dispirited people, as the men of Judah when they basely said to Samson, "Knowest thou not that the Philistines rule over us?" Judge 15:11. When men lose their piety they lose their courage. But it was false that there was any danger of the Romans being irritated against their nation by the progress of Christ's gospel, for it was no way hurtful to kings nor provinces, but highly beneficial. The Romans had no jealousy at all of his growing interest, for he taught men to give tribute to Caesar, and not to resist evil, but to take up the cross. The Roman governor, at his trial, could find no fault in him. There was more danger of the Romans being incensed against the Jewish nation by the priests than by Christ. Note, pretended fears are often the color of malicious designs. Had there really been some danger of displeasing the Romans by tolerating Christ's preaching, yet this would not justify their hating and persecuting a good man. Note, the enemies of Christ and his gospel have often colored their enmity with a seeming care for the public good and the common safety, and, in order to this, have branded his prophets and ministers as troublers of Israel, and men that turn the world upside down. Carnal policy commonly sets up reasons of state, in opposition to rules of justice. When men are concerned for their own wealth and safety more than for truth and duty, it is wisdom from beneath, which is earthly, sensual, and devilish. But see what was the issue. They pretended to be afraid that their tolerating Christ's gospel would bring desolation upon them by the Romans, and therefore, right or wrong, set themselves against it. But it proved that their persecuting the gospel brought upon them that which they feared, filled up the measure of their iniquity, and the Romans came and took away their place and nation, and their place knows them no more. Note, that calamity, which we seek to escape by sin we take the most effectual course to bring upon our own heads, and those who think by opposing Christ's kingdom to secure or advance their own secular interest will find Jerusalem a more burdensome stone than they think it is. Zech 12:3. The fear of the wicked it shall come upon them. Prov 10:24. Caiaphas makes a malicious but mystical speech in the council on this occasion.